and Bamba just wasn't enough to keep them connected. So I have to commend my great colleagues who are investing so much to make sure that those things that we always felt were weaknesses, now we can leverage them to become bridges and to do much, much better. So I think we're recognizing in the Jewish world that not everyone is going to make Aliyah. I come from Maccabi World Union. We used to sign people on contracts when they came to swim at the Maccabiah that said, I promise to make Aliyah. My home in Israel, my bait is Beit Tfutzot. That's where Impact is based there. Beit Tfutzot is no longer the Museum of the Diaspora. That's in a recognition that we're now the Museum of the Jewish people, that there is going to be a diaspora. We're not we're not chronicling something that's ending. The Jewish Agency, my former organization, working with the diaspora ministry, started a joint World Jewry initiative in recognition that it wasn't just the diaspora that needed to invest in Israel, but Israel that needed to invest in strong communities in the diaspora, and that these relationships will matter for our future. So I guess that's what we're all about here. Excuse me for the long introduction.
That's fine. It's very interesting. I think I also have one of these, and if not, I'm loud enough. I think at least that's what my husband thinks and my kids. So my name is Ravid Baer, and I'm the Deputy Consul General in San Francisco. I know some of the faces, so you probably maybe know me or heard me.
From passports that she's issued for you.
Sorry about that. I represent, I guess, the government of Israel. The consulate is a branch of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is the part of the Israeli government. And later on, I guess, when we'll have more discussion, we'll talk about how the Israeli government's view of the relations between Israel and diaspora, Israel that are leaving Israel, moving to other countries, have changed, and where do we think that we need to create a connection and to maintain it, and how do they benefit Israel, how can we benefit them, and how do we maintain, and you mentioned that, how do we maintain the connection between Israelis that no longer reside in Israel to Israel. And as you mentioned, it's true, there are a lot of surveys that show that second and third generation Israelis lose the connection entirely, even more than American Jews. So we'll talk about it a little more later.
Yeah, the role of the children is definitely something I want us to get to eventually. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Shalom, everyone. My name is Noga, Brenner, Samia. So I'm hyphenated in more ways than one. My name as well as my identity. Born in Israel to American parents, so back and forth my whole life, bilingual, bicultural. So when I saw that I was assigned to this panel, I felt, my first reaction was, of course, felt very much at home. I'm exactly what they're talking about. I'm hyphenated in every way possible. But then, of course, and you alluded to it, people like us, and probably some of you in the room, I would imagine, I'm looking at some that I know, also feel this way, that on the one hand, I answer to all these categories of hyphenation. On the other hand, we don't answer to any of them. So we're at home in both worlds, and of course what comes with that is never being quite at home anywhere. But when I learned, we're kind of in good company. I'll just say, you know what, I'll say something about Bina, because you asked me to say something about the organization that I represent here is Bina, the Jewish Movement for Social Change, Hatnuah Liyadut Chevratit. And we run a network of secular yeshivas in Israel that's trying to do Judaism differently in Israel, and a way that we can connect outside of this dichotomy of the religious and the non-religious in Israel, and outside of the denominations and the whole religious stream discussion, but actually connect through Torah learning and through social activism and through community building. And it's something that resonates with many Israelis, as you can imagine, and also, I would imagine, is compelling to some degree to many Jews and Israelis and American Jews that are living here as well. So that's kind of the role.
Great. So welcome everybody. Let's think about what this conference is trying to do, right? So the idea in this conference is to say, now we there's a state, it's established, it's just like Ben-Gurion wanted, or a country like any other country, but kind of what's next? Because something, as David Brooks mentioned, in our souls draws us to, makes us think that this is that there's something to this country and to this people that's bigger than just that. And so, if you think about Israelis in the diaspora for a long time, like when I left Israel as a kid. You were considered a yoled. You were considered somebody who went down. Nowadays, people don't use the word yoled anymore. They talk about relocation, right? And kind of everybody wants to. Oh, I'm doing a relocation. Oh, great! Now all of a sudden you've gone from being sort of at the bottom of the barrel, the lowest form of life, to all of a sudden being this kind of aspirational brand of human being. And it's sort of happened, and it's happened in the years that I've been in the U.S. and it's happened as Israel as an economy has grown, has sort of become more open to the outside world and sort of more globalized. And so now, whereas in the past, I think as an Israeli here, there was always this talk of we're going to go back. I had a friend, a colleague of mine at Columbia when I taught at Columbia.
We did.
Yeah, but many didn't. In my first 8 years of my career taught at Columbia, I had a colleague that used to say, the day I decide to stay in the U.S. is the day I'm going back. Right? And so everybody lived with this, and I'm sure a few people here in the room kind of had that conversation with themselves. That is a conversation that by and large, at least informally, you don't hear so much anymore. Right, and so you can, and now there's even this organization, the IAC. I don't know if those of you who are involved or have seen it. It's this bizarre festival where you get to feel like you're in Israel, but you're really in Miami for the weekend, or in DC, and you feel super patriotic, but then you kind of walk back to your American life. But sort of the growth of that conference and all the rah-rah around it in the community. And also what we see here suggests that now this kind of hyphenated community is ready to say, well, wait a second, sort of, all right, well, we have meaning. We have an identity that's actually relevant to the broader Jewish community and to sort of Zionism in general. And kind of, what is our brand of sort of being proud Israelis but not living there? Where does that fit? And what relationship should these hyphenated communities have with the state of Israel? What sense of ownership can we have over what happens in Israel? Right? Because your American Jewish friends see you as more owners of what's happening, but Israelis in Israel see you as less owners because you're not there. And sort of where in the mosaic of different communities and how they contribute to this kind of new movement, sort of where do we stand? And so this is kind of that's sort of the general scope of what this panel is going to be about. And I'd like to start with Shlomi. You had sort of both. You sort of had a series of thoughts about diaspora in general and sort of diaspora Israeli. So why don't we have you sort of start the discussion and then we'll move on down.
Gladly.
Okay.
But just for my curiosity,
מקליטים.
by the end of the session, we'll figure it out. Just a quick show of hands. How many are originally from Israel in the room? Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's actually.
You can leave it there, actually. You don't need that piece.
Sure, I'm not sure, but we'll try. One of the fascinating things about the Israeli diaspora, I'm going to talk about diaspora a little bit. There is actually a brand new science. I mean, the amount of academic writings on diaspora has peaked over the last 30 years dramatically. It's a real rich and thriving field. And in many respects, the Israeli diaspora is actually much more of a classic diaspora than the Jewish diaspora. Because the classic model of a diaspora is people leaving the homeland. Most of world Jews did not leave a homeland to be where they were. They were actually born in the countries where they reside. It's the only country where rather than the homeland creating the diaspora built the homeland. That's what's unique about the Jewish diaspora. But I want to, when we want to reflect on the place and the role of the Israeli diaspora that has taken a leap in the last 10 years. Recently, there was actually a week or two ago, there was a huge conference of the Israeli-American Council. There were 2,500 people there in Florida. It's becoming a powerhouse. There's a real question of where do they fit in the picture? Are they leaders? Are they in between? there are different ways and different aspirations and different questions about the role that they can play. But what I'd like to do is actually offer maybe a few basic conceptual terms that maybe will make our conversation a little more grounded and richer. And I would propose that as it relates to the Israeli diaspora, we have to look at three perspectives. First of all, what is its own identity? What is its self-identity? The second one is its relationship to the homeland, to Israel. And the third one is its relationship to the American Jewish community at large. I strongly recommend those of you who are interested in the topic, there is a very, very good article, which is actually user-friendly, called Diaspora. The Diaspora by one Rogers Brubaker from UCLA, who's a lead scholar on nationalism. And he revisits sort of the three basic criteria for diasporas. I'll go over them very quickly and mention how they're changing actually in front of our eyes. So the first one is the notion of dispersion, which is pretty intuitive, right? In order to be part of the diaspora, you have to be dispersed, not in your original place. The second one, which becomes more interesting, talks about the homeland orientation. What is the orientation of that group towards the homeland? And I'd like to read to you some of the criteria that Safran, who was one of the lead researchers, provided for a diaspora. At first, it's maintaining a collective memory or myth about the homeland. Collective memory or myth about the homeland. The second is regarding the ancestral home as the true, ideal home, and as the place to which one would or should eventually return. Think of it when you think actually about the difference between sort of the American diaspora, the Jewish American diaspora and the Israeli diaspora. Third, being collectively committed to the maintenance or restoration of the homeland and its safety and prosperity. Okay, actually, I think resonates. And the fourth, interesting enough, is continuing to relate personally or vicariously to the homeland in a way that significantly shapes one's identity and solidarity. I think that actually speaks a lot for the Israeli diaspora. However, recent discussions in the field of diaspora are challenging the centrality of the homeland orientation. Basically, they're objecting to the definition that they're oriented by continuous cultural connections to a single source or by teleology of return, which is actually much more typical of the Jewish community. The notion that you have to return to the homeland is really not part of the language and the conversation. It's also fading out among the Israeli diaspora. The third one, which is also very interesting, is boundary maintenance. Boundary maintenance of the group, that is what enables one to speak of a diaspora as a distinctive community, held together by distinctive active solidarity, as well as by a relatively dense social relationship that cut across state boundaries and link members of the diaspora in different states into a single transnational community. This is very true of the Jewish community. I'm not sure whether Israelis who moved here, what is the relationship with Israelis who moved to European countries and so on and so forth.
The language is a distinctive character that keeps everybody together.
That is definitely, that's when you speak about the cultural component. So, taking those big criteria and zeroing in on the Israeli diaspora. My assessment after actually observing this community over 50 years, both in I spent a few years in Los Angeles, I studied that community in at the end of the 60s. I spent time in New York in the mid-'80s and studied the New York Israeli community. And here in the Bay Area, I worked very closely with the group that then created the ICC, the Israeli community.
IAC.
No, here they're called ICC. Yeah, Israeli Cultural
I know
Center.
that one.
Yeah. I would say that the Israeli community has made giant steps, but before becoming a true force in developing Jewish peoplehood, and Zionism needs to address some of its own challenges. It needs to figure out what is its own ethos, as distinctly from Israelis who reside in Israel or the Jews who reside here. Is it part of the Jewish diaspora or a unique standalone entity that relates directly to Israel with programmatic ties or practical ties to the Jewish community? It hasn't figured it out yet. Where does it stand when there are tensions between Israel and the Jewish world? What is the long-term vision? And what is the desirable and realistic communal vision? All researchers agree that the real study is not after one generation, but really when you see what happens to the second and third generation. And once we figure out those basic things, we can begin discussing its potential role vis-a-vis Israel and the Jewish community, whether they can be communicators, whether they can be leaders, and so on and so forth. But they have to figure out their identity, and it's not, in my opinion, my assessment, it's not a process that has been completed yet.
Right. So apropos identity, I want to actually move to you, Noga, because one of the interesting things that is part of as this kind of Z3 thing happens, one of the interesting things that happens to Israelis when they move abroad is that they find some form of religion in some way. And one of the interesting things I think that's happening in secular communities in Israel is they're now that, it used to all be around the land, and now we're sort of past the part that we're around the land, and people kind of are looking for spirituality in some other way. And in some ways, your organization is at the nexus of that, or trying to foment that. So maybe we'll go to you next and with your remarks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll start by saying, I know we kind of think that we invented this whole hyphenated, and maybe we did invent that term. I mean, it was kind of, I've now, I think the organizer of this conference very well articulated the seam line communities or hyphenated, but the concept has been around for many, many, many years. Back in the time of the rabbinic times, at the time of the Talmud, there's actually a different name for it, and it's really interesting. It was called, we would have been called, and many of you guys would have been called nechute. That was the word that was used for those that went back and forth between Israel and Bavel and Babylonia, mainly taking Torah from the yeshiva in Tveria and bringing it to Bavel and Aloch Hazor. And some of them were merchants and they were doing business, apropos a lot of you. There was no United direct flight, but I'm sure that they were all good, well-travelers. Some of them were scholars that were bringing Torah back and forth, and some of them were fundraisers, trying, even back then, to still raise money for the yeshiva in Israel. And I think the interesting, I mean, you could say it's only semantics, but on the other hand, language is everything, right? Nechute, from the word nachut, from the word to go down, linchot is to come down, and nachut inferior, to some degree, became yored, yerida, yordim. But today, I really feel that, oops, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm sorry.
You started a trend.
Yeah, I started. I didn't want you to feel bad, Shlomi.
Thank you.
So I think it is a lot about definitions and what language we use. At Binan, I'll circle back to what Binan's trying to do. So Binan's really trying to do something that Bialik, Chaim Nachman Bialik, right, our national poet, he put this forward back at the end of the previous century, at the end of the 19th century, saying we need to do something lig'ol et terminim. We need to redeem terminology. So he wasn't about making up new words. He was actually about taking the old terminology and giving it new life. And so when you take the word yeshiva, and we're saying in Israel, it's not just what yeshiva has come to be known in Israel as a place for Orthodox men to study Talmud. Well, let's take that word and actually redefine it and say something else. It's also a place where men and women could teach and learn Torah. And part of Torah is also social activism and community building and all these things that are Jewish values that are important to us, and we do that as well. So I think finding the right language, and I put this in quote because it's not only about the Hebrew English, although that's an issue, and I hope we get to talk about that because that's definitely an issue. But it's really about trying to find those places of connection. And I'll say one more thing. I think that for us, it's less concern about where we are, if we're in Israel or outside Israel. It's really about finding allies in creating the kind of Judaism and the kind of Jewish language that we're trying to create, whether it's here or there. And I think that's the role, if I have to point to one role of the nechute, of these communities that go back and forth, that have an understanding about what's going on there and have an understanding about what's going on here and are able to be those connectors and able to find and bridge and create this across the ocean, like-minded communities that span right across both sides of the ocean. That's, I think, the strength of this hyphenated communities, and that's, I think, we have no other choice but to create stronger communities that are on both sides, that are like-minded. Our allies for the work that we're doing in Israel, I find more allies here at Oshman JCC than I do in any JCC, in any matnas in Israel, in anywhere in Israel. And why? There are a lot of reasons. I think the Judaism that has evolved in Israel, because of Israel, right, a majority being a sovereign state, being now a majority of Jews, versus here being a minority of Jews in a Christian society. I think all these things contribute to the kind of Judaism that evolved in Israel versus the kind of Judaism that evolved in America. And I think one thing that resonated in this morning's session about how ethical values, moral values, are a salient part of the Jewish identity of Americans here. And I think that we're trying to make that a much more salient and central part of our Jewish identity there. And so that's one example of how we find like-minded partners in this work here. It's not about, so again, just to sum up, it's not about where we're living. It's really less about, and certainly, I don't know, to keep raising and this issue of negating the diaspora, if you ask anyone under the age of 30 today in Israel, do they even know that term? Shlilat HaGolah, negating diaspora, it's non-existent. In fact, we've done such a good job at combating that phenomena that I think we've got to the other extreme, and I think you know this as well. We have the opposite is happening, and actually the brain drain is attracting folks to travel and to go here and to other places around the world. That's a wonderful thing. I think it's something to leverage. We're bringing Judaism and Israeliness across the world, but it's also something that says to me, we don't have the problem anymore of negating diaspora. I think if anything, we have the problem of the opposite.
I want to address the Rabbi's question for a minute. I think it's about communal structures. I think the answer to why is that, I'll give you a perfect example. 93, I went back to Israel again. I've been back and forth and back and forth. And I wanted to work in Jewish life, and guess what? There were no jobs in Jewish life. We didn't have JCCs that were dealing with this. It's not a natural construct in a world in a society that's a majority, okay? This, by the way, is key to why Israelis did not integrate in the diaspora, because our communities here are faith-based communities. And an Israeli will be the first one to tell you that you're not really Jewish if you're conservative or reform. Okay, do you go to Orthodox synagogue? Of course I don't go. So they neutralize all of it. They don't go to any of it. And the amazing thing, if I put my Sochnut hat on, by the way, that's how I ended up in high tech. I couldn't find a job in Jewish life. I ended up in marketing in high tech. But the amazing thing as marketing person for the Jewish Agency, was the way that these shlichim transformed Israeli society was that we brought Israelis to the diaspora, and we brought back Jews. And suddenly we built communities in Israel that had some, they didn't find their place in Israel, but they had some feeling of faith. But it's not a natural thing. These constructs are very new to Israelis, to find their place and to feel validated as Jewish people outside the confines of what the state recognizes. And I think that's a very hard piece. And even the Jewish Agency today, you know, we talk about bringing Jews to Israel. Great. The Jewish Agency is responsible for all the immigration to Israel. Their entire purpose has been Aliyah for 85 years. Today they say if we can't bring you to Israel short, long-term, or Aliyah, we're going to bring Israel to you. The IAC, I just want to qualify for a minute because he spoke about the conference. The IAC is not just a conference. And the skeptic in me, by the way, who's always been very uncomfortable in Israeli communities because I felt that in many ways they were pushing off the Israeliness in my generation. I can only speak from my experience. The IAC has gone through a major transformation. The IAC began in LA with people that I know who saw their children and grandchildren leaving our community in record numbers, more than Americans. Why? Because they didn't have that connection to a faith-based community. In droves, they were leaving. They were growing up on Bamba with no Hebrew and no connection and no tradition and no religion. And suddenly the ISC came, I know because they came to us for content. They said, oh, maybe we need content. Maybe we should be teaching our kids something so they stay connected to Israel and to our communities. That's a very new thing for them. And I'll tell you something, in the last few years, we've seen a complete transformation. I'm incredibly impressed with what they've been able to do because they have a Hebrew PJ library. They've brought the youth groups. They're much more content rich than they've ever been before. And just to say on the other side that, you know, why it is that this back and forth is so important. There's a book called The Case for Jewish Peoplehood. Can we be one? And, you know, I'm a little bit biased because my boss, Misha Galperin, is one of the authors. The other is Erica Brown, who's absolutely phenomenal. They talk about us for thousands of years being a people without a state. And that in Israel today, we're in danger of being a state without a people. And that's what diaspora Jewry or these hyphenated communities abroad can help with, okay? You know, Israel can bring that connectedness. We can talk about this incredible thought process of being a startup nation and all these things that we know how to do from a military society. But it's the Jewish neshama that we can learn, that inclusiveness, the pluralism, the big tent that we have to learn from our societies abroad.
So Nirit, would you say that the role then of the hyphenated communities, particularly the Israeli American community, is to, you know, bring back religion or sort of tradition to Israel? Is that what you're proposing?
I don't know that's no. I think
or to present some kind of modern, secular but Jewish alternative life.
I think
to
that
Israel?
in many ways we're the Hasbara.
But Hasbara for who, in what direction?
The Israeli communities today are finding a home, and this is another thing that's very interesting, because if you look at the studies, and Shlomi will understand this better than I do, when you look at studies, at least in America, and they talk about affiliation, how do they judge affiliation? Synagogue membership. Okay? Think about all the people who are not members of synagogues that are getting lost inside this idea of affiliation. Okay? And it's actually now there's an understanding and I can give you another great example. Ted Sokolsky, who is the CEO of the Federation in Toronto, had a special program within the Federated movement. And today you have places like Lincoln Square Synagogue in New York that are the Free, Stephen Wise Free in Lincoln Square, that are making programming specifically for Israelis that are touching more upon the cultural traditions than the religious side, that are now bringing these people in. And it is the Israelis that are now saying, guess what? You know, we're keeping this tradition and that tradition, and we're sending our kids back to Jewish school. You know that in my tradition, in my generation, they didn't want to send their kids to Jewish school. It was too religious for them. So they weren't speaking Hebrew with their kids. They weren't giving their kids any kind of Jewish literacy. They gave them bamba, and they thought they were going to have Jewish grandchildren.
That way they don't get peanut allergies.
That is true. That is innovation, my friends. Israel has very few peanut allergies because of bamba.
So, Ravit, you're hearing all this, and so I mean, you're an Israeli living in the U.S., but by virtue of being here, sent by the government, you're not hyphenated.
I'm not
And so you're hearing all these things, and sort of how does the foreign ministry kind of see the role of these communities? Has what you heard here, does that resonate with the role that the community could have in one way or another? Do you think everybody's crazy? Let loose.
Everyone's crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm Israeli 100%, and I've only been here for a very specific time limit, and I'll be back in Israel next summer. And for me, it was a very interesting experience because this was my first time ever serving in a country with actually any kind of Jewish diaspora. My previous missions were in the Ivory Coast and Cyprus, and there are no Jewish communities around there. So in a way, it's a lot more normal mission, I want to say, for an Israeli diplomat. So, but if I want to talk specifically about the Israeli diaspora, I think the government of Israel really had a change of heart in the way it looks at the Israeli diaspora. And it has to do with several things. I mean, historically speaking, the idea of an Israeli leaving Israel and going to live somewhere else is really undermining the idea of Zionism. The Jews should come to Israel and establish a homeland. And this was the perception, and this is why the government has treated them, as you mentioned, as Yordin, as someone who did wrong. And should come back eventually. And this created distant to communities. It distanced Israel because from the Israelis in diaspora because they did wrong and they should go, apologize and come back eventually. And the other side was that the Israelis abroad, and you mentioned that, all three of you, if you don't want me, then I don't want you. I mean, both sides kind of distant themselves from one another. And again, we're talking about 40, 50, 60 years ago, communication was not the way it is today. I mean, they couldn't Skype with their family. They couldn't have all these books and movies and whatever that are very available today. I mean, to do Israeli abroad was a lot more complicated. You really needed to do a lot in order to actually succeed in doing that. And I feel so. Things have changed because also Israel became a lot wealthier and in a way a lot more normal. Israel today is more of a normal country, more similar to other countries in the world in the fact that it is more secure in its status around the world, in the fact that it has a large Jewish majority, it is strong enough, it has a very thriving economy that can really sustain its population. And in that way, we can kind of in a way accept the idea that we'll have certain part of the population moving abroad. And even, believe it or not, that could be a good thing for Israel. And the things that we are realizing, and we see statistics for that, and the Ministry of Finance is doing all these surveys around it, we are seeing the benefit, the economic benefit, and the cultural benefit and the academic benefits that we're getting from the presence of Israelis abroad. So I can give you a million examples. I mean, and you were talking about the direct flight from Israel to San Francisco. So I just read last week that the first direct flight from San Francisco to Italy is going to be established in the next few months. It's going to be 3 times a week to Milan. So just imagine Italy, this huge country, which is a huge draw for tourism and economy and whatever, doesn't have yet a direct flight from the Bay Area. Israel has a daily flight, and it's going to have another one with Al Al. And why is that so important? This is a huge benefit to the Israeli economy. I'm not even talking here about the relations that are amazing and the fact that people are going back and forth, but the economy is gaining from that both here and there. And this is a very important link. The minute that both sides understand that we're benefiting, not just as people, but also economically, that's a huge, huge impact and encouragement to maintain those relations. So the minute the government really understood that we can be beneficial to one another and the presence of Israel around the world is really something that benefits Israel, things have changed. So today, for example, we have a position in our consulate, which is the Israeli House, which is a very interesting position because it is financed by the Ministry of Absorption, which is the ministry that is supposed to accept all the Jews that are immigrating to Israel, give them all the services, the ulpan and whatever, in order to be integrated into the society. So they sponsored this position in many consulates around the world. That historically their job was to give services to Israelis that are interested in coming back to Israel. This is what they started off. But today, mostly like 60 to 70% of their time is dedicated to maintaining the cultural and connection between Israelis and Israel, really creating an environment that is convenient and comfortable for Israelis to be Israeli, to see Israeli plays, to have Israeli events, Tu B'Shvat, which is a very important holiday in Israel, to celebrate the birth of the trees. So all these things really creating a community of Israelis, and they work all over the world, actually, even though it's predominantly in the US, in really establishing this connection. And they work a lot with the ICC here, which is a really pretty amazing phenomena, I guess, in the world of an Israeli center. And there are a lot of, so in a way, our perception of Israelis and Israelis' role in the world and what they can bring to Israel and what we can bring to them has really changed.
Also a voice for advocacy, because the Israeli diaspora voice in terms of defense, frontline defense for against BDS, and of advocacy in Israel, I think that the Israeli government has also recognized the importance of their voice in defending Israel abroad.
Yeah. And even if you talk about the faculty that you're part of, we met with your dean a few months ago, and the statistics is amazing. There are 5 Israelis that's what he said, in the business school of Stanford.
The school that has sent the most graduates to be professors at the Stanford Graduate School of Business is Hebrew University.
Yes. This is an unbelievable statistics. 5% of your faculty.
So all of us on the faculty, there's 127 of us. If you group us all by our undergraduate university, the university that says sent the most, that's most highly represented, right? So the modal university is Hebrew University.
Yes.
More than Princeton, more than Harvard.
5% of their faculty, 5% of their faculty is Israeli. This is Stanford Business School, one of the most important ones in the world by far. I mean, the leader really in business school in the world. And 5% of their faculty is Israeli. This is highly important for Israel in the fact that we can. This is an infrastructure to create exchange with faculties in Israel, and we see it all the time. Those are the people that bring the connection, not because it's not even an ideological thing, but because it's the easiest way for them. I mean, if I'm an Israeli and I want to establish any kind of exchange, it's so much easier for me because I'm Israeli. I know the people, I know the culture, I know how to do that. Same in business. It's not always about the ideology, and it's okay to say that you can have connection that is based on interest, mutual interests.
Yeah. So
if we're talking business.
Yeah, so I want to take that, and I want to maybe open up also to the audience and start thinking about where do we go next? Kind of. Yeah.
I wanted to expand on the part that you brought before.
Sure.
And that was how exactly the different people with different political parties to what we find to be. The reason I'm raising that is because amazingly, on Friday, I was watching channel 12 what they did in the Israeli television. And they had a 30 minutes interview with Gigi from Ravid about what we're doing here in Palo Alto for years now. And the interview was a
in Israel or here?
From just the foreign, the State Department of Foreign Department. I wanted to know the leadership of the different parties. Are they open to what we are doing here? Would they welcome it? We put something up?
What you said, what we're doing here, as in this conference of across Israeli-American initiative of Zionism.
Will be involved
Yeah.
in establishing
I think,
Jewish
yeah.
future life.
Because you
I
would think
think-
that you know it should be Tzadik Shalosh, you know it should be in Israel.
Tzaddik
You
Shalom.
know, like the third instead of saying Zayin Shalosh.
That's good.
You know,
You tell the rest of us what their joke is.
No, just Zionism in Hebrew is Tzionut, which starts with a tzaddik. So tzaddik 3, Z3, which is what we've learned from you guys. How do we export that or back to Israel as
yeah, I mean, so
Yeah.
let me add some kind of an interpretation to Ellie's question, which is that, you know, shouldn't this conversation be happening in Israel, and how would different stakeholders in the Israeli political system view a conversation about modifying what Zionism is that starts in Tony Palo Alto?
Bring in the nation state thing too, bring in there.
Yeah.
I think they've already embraced it.
I think, I mean, I'm happy to, I'll say one thing, and then I know that, well, I'll give an example from our world. We're just recently submitted a special request to the Finance Committee of the Knesset to evaluate the allocation of funds for Jewish learning in Israel. And in order to do that, you have to come forward with at least four political parties, right? The funds are given generously to Orthodox organizations in Israel to study Torah. If you're an Orthodox Jew, it's very easy to find funding to study Torah. For a secular Jew, it's very hard to find funding to study Torah. There's no funding of any kind of learning that's outside of the Orthodox world. That's funded by the state. And so it was not that difficult to find four parties to go in on this. So your question, so Meretz, Zionist Camp, Kulanu, and Yesh Atid are all signed on this. Now, that's one way of answering. Is that a majority in the Knesset? To the point that was made early in the morning, do Israelis make these issues their top agenda when they go to vote every, I want to say 4 years, it's not 4 years, it's usually less than that. Every some period of time, less than 4 years. So usually not. But I will say what I disagree, I will say here what I disagree with what was said earlier. Yes, Israelis are concerned about economy and security. And you're right, those are the salient issues spoken about. But Israelis go to the Kalfi, they go to vote based on identity. That's the bottom line, that's what drives their vote. It's identity. And so I think this idea of a Zionism that's broader than just Israel for Israelis, that includes the Jewish people, that's an identity issue that I think that many Israelis actually are embracing and do embrace. Will that drive them to vote a certain way in the Kalfi? You know, it's harder to.
Not to vote, but I think the question was about political parties.
Kalfi is the, how do you say that?
Hebrew is like the voting.
The voting.
I think the question was about political parties. And I think the answer is very complicated, because they will embrace it in a second because they think it's going to help them get support abroad. And I'll give you another example from my experience at the Jewish Agency, was Naftali Bennett, okay, in the diaspora ministry. He jumped on the bandwagon. We need to support the Jews in the diaspora. We're going to put money in the diaspora. It's our job to strengthen those communities. And then came the wall. And together with Natan Sharansky, they had an egalitarian section at the wall, and he called it the Bennett Plan. Suddenly it was his, until it wrecked. It was about to wreck the coalition. Suddenly there's no more Bennett Plan. So yes, they want to embrace it as long as it's going to keep them popular abroad. And I think that by and large, all the parties embrace the idea that we need to strengthen the diaspora in order to strengthen Israel. They also collect money abroad. Let's not be disillusioned by the fact that they all have American friends out. And I actually think most of them want to. But then they get into the political complexities, because the issues that come up from abroad are issues like pluralism, And these are the issues that tear their coalitions apart. And so they start to do this dance where they're with us and then they're not with us. It's like this tango. And so I think strategically and ideologically they're with us, but in terms of their actions, it's only as good as the most recent coalition.
So all we can hope here is that one day there will be a coalition that will not include the religious party.
Or we can hope that we have a new generation of leaders that's willing to look at ideology and not at coalition building as much. Or that we change our system of election so that it looks like direct votes and we don't need the coalitions. But you know, Mashiach might come sooner and maybe he'll bring a new Karpi.
Shlomi, you had a comment on this debate.
It's actually it's developing in an interesting fashion, because actually the champions of working with the Israeli community is the diaspora ministry now in Israel. And this whole peoplehood conversation, I was at a very large gathering of the Ministry of Education that's also Bennett's territory. There is an openness, there is a recognition de facto. It's a little bit like what Balin said of maybe we should accept the reality. There is an understanding that Israelis who don't reside in Israel, who don't live in Israel, is a fact of life in the modern world. However, and this is why it all connects, there was really no re-articulation of, okay, so what does Zionism really mean? Because I think that is really the question. And I think this is what this conference is trying to do. Are we going to embrace a broader perspective that talks about peoplehood as sort of as our core belief? Do we see our primary client as the Jewish people? When I was working in the Bay Area, I used to come to the Federation. I said, we should work with the Israeli community because, you know, they're Jews too. And I think that this is all part of the need to really re-envision and rethink what it means in this day and age to sustain the Jewish enterprise. And the fact that the nature of the Jewish enterprise is changing. And it's not only, you know, Zionism is only, you know, pack up and move. There are other expressions of it, and there are issues of ethos, there are issues of ethics. That conversation is not happening. So while you see changes that Israelis have come to terms, I actually don't agree. I think that part of the DNA of Israeli is a DNA that they receive from their parents, that it's faux pas to leave the country. So there are still lots of Israelis that will accept it, but are actually, it's a little bit like a form of racism. You know, if you talk to them in a private environment, they would be very critical of people who decided to take a different path. And I think this is what needs to, I mean, we need to tackle it at the core. That life is just too complex to put it all on political and ideological decisions.
So Shlomi, is basically what you're saying that, and I'll open this to the panel and also if people have thoughts, are you basically saying that Israelis aren't ready for the hyphenated Israelis to have any role in what Zionism is or what is, you know, Israel and so on and so forth? That Israelis just, you know, that there's this kind of ambiguous relationship. We're not sure what it is. We're not ready to let you lead anything. Just send some money, or maybe not, or just come visit in the summers, or you know, help my cousin when he flies over and does a relocation, and kind of happy with this kind of detente.
I think the picture is complex. And there is what the leadership, when you talk about the IAC, there's the picture of what the leadership thinks, but there's also a whole large community. One of the fascinating studies in diaspora studies is we talk about diaspora as one homogeneous group of people. Mapito. They're activists. They're people like the people sitting here. But the majority are busy with many other things. Majority, you can count them as part of the Jewish diaspora, but they don't feel that they're part of you can count them as part of the Israeli diaspora. They don't feel that they are that part. And it's the same with Israelis. There are many of them who would say, okay, it's a fact of life. And there are many of them who are really concerned, what would happen to my kids? How do I make sure that they stay home? And how do I close the windows rather than open them? The picture is still being developed, and there's no clear-cut perspective on it.
But there's still a fair amount of resentment. I actually had the father of a friend approach me fairly recently, and he said to me, "Ad zevil." And then he corrected himself.
Garbage,
He said to me, he corrected himself, "At lo zevel, ההורים שלך zevel." For leaving
you're
Israel.
Not garbage. Your parents
Now,
are garbage.
he's much older, but the fact that my parents made a choice to come to it, now he doesn't know my father went to study. Go and explain yourself. But there's still a fair amount of resentment, especially amongst the older generations.
Yeah. So there were hands that went up. I saw. Yes. And and Michael, sorry.
If you could, what do you think about the community here? I'm not just talking about Israeli Americans, the diaspora, but what is it that Israelis don't understand about the wider diaspora, the Jewish diaspora in
You asking me?
the United States, and
All
all
of
of you?
us.
And what is it that you think is that American Jewry doesn't understand about Israel? From your back and forth.
I actually want Ravit to take this one. Please.
Well, I don't know if I'm saying that as a representative of the government, just my perception of
I
things.
see it as only you.
And my feeling is that when Israel think about the fact that they're Jewish, and I'm not talking about Orthodox, I'm more talking about, the secular Israeli, they don't necessarily think of themselves as part of a religion, but they think of themselves as part of a nation. Okay, so I noticed that you're using the word peoplehood instead of nation, which is softer and easier to digest, I guess. Mm-hmm. But if I think of myself, what does it mean to be Jewish? That means being part of a Jewish nation, with all that comes with that. A nation needs a homeland, a nation needs to have a government, independence, whatever. And I feel like American Jews, when they talk about their Judaism, they talk about their religion, about their joint history, their culture, but not necessarily as being part of a nation, or actually not at all being part of a nation, in a way. And I don't think Israelis understand that about Americans, and I don't think Americans understand that about Israelis. And this is what I feel like is the biggest problem. This is where I find it very difficult sometimes to be talking on the same level, and because we're talking in parallel voices a lot of times.
Yeah, I disagree with that statement. I don't think that American Jewry doesn't feel like they're part of a people. I think we talk about peoplehood so much here that it's
Not a people, a nation.
A nation.
I talk about a nation, not a
is a
people.
people or a nation, it doesn't matter. I think at the end of the day,
it's all
חלק
different.
מלאום, אני לא חושבת שהם מבדילים. I don't actually think that way. I think we have a problem with semantics that's really intense, because the fact that we have to choose between religious and secular, I cannot stand the word secular. It just drives me absolutely up the wall. I went down to the car to get something on Shabbat. I wasn't driving the car. And my 4-year-old walks past me, very perplexed, and he says, "Are you secular?" And it's the first time in my life that I thought to call myself secular. I'm a traditional Jew. I keep tons of tradition. Why do I have to choose? And so, but it is that piece that really is very difficult with understanding, because when a Jewish diaspora community wants to celebrate Jewish life, it's generally around celebrations of, and it's changing. I mean, you have all kinds of other things. You look at the kinds of people that you get to come to Yom Ha'atzmaut. You'll see the Israelis twice a year. Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom HaZikaron. And that's why everybody starts to do Yom HaZikaron everywhere, because it's only the Israelis who come for Israeli Memorial Day. I think we feel like we're a people. I think the people here are very frustrated in terms of their voice in Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. But it has a lot to do with content. And I actually think that places like this are more well positioned to bring in Israelis around content that isn't necessarily a dialogue around tradition and religion than a synagogue, where Israelis are very put off from walking into any kind of synagogue. And they're already judgmental. I mean, the fact that the chief rabbi of Israel can say that the Pittsburgh community was not a synagogue, I mean,
You didn't say that.
he wouldn't call it a synagogue. He didn't say that, but he wouldn't call it a synagogue,
You didn't say
right? Okay, so you'll correct me. But whatever it was offensive to many people.
that. The original report was retracted because the original report came out.
Was misquoted.
Yes.
Could very well be, but I can tell you
I mean,
that
you can
sitting
say-
around those
you
tables,
can-
they've had plenty of feedback that
You
way.
can say a lot of things
Yeah.
against him, and I
Yeah.
would probably agree with you. That
If it's
is
fine,
not
I
something
apologize if he
that,
didn't say it, but I can tell you that there are many people who think it.
He's earned his bad press in other ways.
Yes, I agree that he has earned his bad press in many, many ways, not in that way.
But we have to build parallel communities that or structures that will allow us to be together more often and to realize that we have more in common that separates us.
Shlomi, we had a couple minutes left, and you said something like there was the little debate there between Ravit and Nirit. You said I can help.
Sorry, Ravit.
No,
I
no,
love
no,
you
it's
anyway.
good. Debate is good.
No,
I'd
it's
rather-
perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I'm just saying from our perspective, I'm not a specialist in the field, and I really respect your views because they really come out of research and a lot of experience. I'm just talking up to 3 years of
You know,
being
Herzl
around
wasn't
here.
a specialist in Judaism either. He was a journalist, you know? Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah.
So for those who are interested, actually Mordechai Kaplan coined the term, and I strongly recommend reading Judaism as a Civilization, and those who are even more interested can read, there's a recent book written by Noam Pianko called Jewish Peoplehood and American Innovation. It's not a coincidence that they coined the concept of peoplehood. It was to get away from nationalism because Americans are American nationals. And there's a conflict if you present, if we talk in terms of nationalism. And he felt that peoplehood could basically put them together. I did a workshop here with the part of the team of the Israelis, and I brought representative. And I was really struck by one woman from one of the organization who said, I've been here for 5 years, and I haven't gone to one of their synagogues. Their synagogues. So I don't need much more to get upset. And I said, I don't understand this, because at the end, we share Jewish civilization. We're all members of it, and we all share in it. You should have at least the curiosity to have a taste of it. And it's also totally kosher for you to offer your own brand of it, or your own fusion of Israeliness and the way you practice and so on and so forth. But open up to it. So my main concern with the Israeli community, there's a beginning of a process, but it's still lagging behind, that many of them are still alienated from the local community, partly because of Zionist education that did challenge, the religious aspect and basically decided to change history rather than be led by it. But I think there are actually good signs of change. It's like in Mary Poppins, there's something in the air, and maybe this conference will get some things going. I'm a true believer in the initiative of people, and v'yesh at ratzon, as we say. It's a good hour. Maybe we can make something happen.
So,
Are we ending?
yeah, we
I'd
have
like
to
conclude.
wrap up. I want to thank the panelists. For those of you who are hoping to walk out of here with a charge of exactly what hyphenated communities are going to do, a call of action, what they're going to mean for Zionism,
Can I end with
you're ignoring Zionist
words
history.
of
There were
Torah?
no. Zionism has been a discussion since it started. It only made one decision, and it was made by Ben Gurion in 1948. And everything else has just been talking. So we're well within the tradition of what this what this movement has been about, and what it's going to become is a question.
I thought it would just be right to end with a little bit of words of Torah. So I'm going to read just from Amar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So Shimon Bar Yochai wrote, "This is like a person who brought two ships and anchored them together and placed them in the middle of the sea and built upon them a palace. As long as the ships are tied to each other, the palace exists. Once the ships separate from each other, the palace cannot exist.
Lovely. יישר כוח.
Thank you, Jonathan.